A cruel and arrogant man kicked a black man in the chest, but froze when he found out the man was the Mafia Boss. And just like that, a moment meant to humiliate turned into the beginning of his downfall. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. The sun was relentless over the city, reflecting sharply off the glass of a tall downtown building. The underground parking lot buzzed with a low rumble of engines, the distant clicking of heels, the slow rhythm of a weekday in motion. That's when he parked, quiet, composed, stepping out of a clean black car that didn't scream luxury, but whisper class. His suit was dark, precise. He didn't seem out of place, not unless you were looking through a certain lens. And someone was. The man who watched him pull into the wrong spot didn't see a businessman. He didn't see a guest. He didn't even see a human being. He saw someone he believed didn't belong there. And in a city where microaggressions were uniforms and smirks, this wasn't about a parking space. This was about power. Hey, you blind or just can't read signs? The voice thundered through the garage, echoing against the concrete pillars. The suited man turned slowly, politely, brows lifting in calm confusion. But the rage was already boiling in the man charging toward him, wearing a maintenance vest and fury like armor. That's not for you. You people always act like the rules don't apply, huh? I'm sorry, I didn't see a name on the spot, came the response, measured, non-aggressive, not submissive either, just clear. Don't get smart with me. And without warning, a boot met his chest. The crack of impact rang louder than the insult. He staggered back, nearly collapsing, as the other man puffed up, laughing through his nose, hands on hips. Around them, heads turned. A woman walking past stifled a gasp. A man exiting the elevator stood frozen. Someone recorded. No one helped. What? Nothing to say now, the aggressor taunted, stepping forward like he might go in for another hit. Thought so. Just walk away like a good boy. Stay in your place. But the man didn't walk away. Not exactly. He stood up slowly, adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, brushed off the dust like it meant nothing. His eyes unreadable, his voice calm. You have no idea what you just did. There was no shout, no threat, no vengeance in his tone. Just fact. A cold, haunting kind of truth that stuck to the walls long after he turned and walked away. At first, nothing happened. The maintenance worker gloated. He replayed the video on his phone to his friends at night, proud. He even got more aggressive with people he didn't like around the building. They laughed at his authority, cheered him on like he was some kind of champion for putting that guy in his place. He became bold, reckless. He felt untouchable. But then came the first sign. His supervisor stopped replying to his texts. Then, his direct deposit didn't hit on Friday. His car lease was suddenly voided due to errors in paperwork. And then, late one night, someone knocked on his door. 3 short knocks. No one there when he opened it, only a red envelope on the floor. Inside it, a photo of him kicking the man, printed in black and white. No words. No return address. The anxiety grew. He started watching over his shoulder. The laughter disappeared. His friends pulled away. One by one, people he used to intimidate began to avoid him, not out of fear, but disgust. Whispers followed him now. Faces changed when he entered a room. His name, once loud, became a warning. Then came the day he was taken. Right in the middle of work, while replacing a busted panel in the loading dock, 3 black SUVs pulled up. Doors opened in unison, like choreography. Out came federal agents, badges gleaming under the dim fluorescent lights. Cameras clicked. Phones came out. Everyone stared. Are you Kevin Malik? He blinked. Yeah, why? You're under arrest for aggravated assault, workplace harassment, and connections to organized criminal activity. What? No, this is a mistake. I didn't. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a reckoning. The man he'd kicked? He wasn't just some random guy in a suit. He was the shadow behind the city's most powerful moves, a silent orchestrator whose name never appeared in headlines, only in whispers. A man whose silence was more dangerous than any scream. And he had waited, not to destroy, but to teach, not to fight back, but to remind the world that dignity isn't weakness, And sometimes, karma wears a suit too. Because the truth is, the humiliation wasn't about a parking space. It wasn't even about skin, though the aggressor certainly thought it was. It was about what happens when cruelty meets consequence. When ego underestimates silence. When power is mistaken for invisibility. But here's the real question. Why did he let it happen? Why, knowing exactly who he was, with all his influence, his reach, his absolute power, did he let the man kick him like that in public with witnesses? Was it a test? Was it bait? Or was it a game being played on a level the aggressor could never begin to understand? There's more to this story than revenge. There's a reason he didn't fight back, not then. And once you know why, you'll never see power the same way again. Stay with us. Because the story is just getting started. To every black viewer watching this, we see you, we stand with you, and we support you. Tales of Twist strongly condemns any form of racism, discrimination, or prejudice. Your story, your voice, and your dignity matter, and they deserve to be protected and honored. Enjoy this story, and remember, no one can take your power unless you hand it over. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Tales of Twist for more real, emotional, and powerful narratives. Let's begin. The city of Baltimore had a way of swallowing people whole. Not just the weak, not just the poor, but anyone who ever dared to blend in, to move in silence, to play a longer game. It wasn't the skyline that made it intimidating, or the broken streets patched one too many times. It was the eyes. The way people looked at you like they'd already measured your worth before you even opened your mouth. And in that city, in the middle of the financial district, behind polished glass and concrete masks, lived two men who couldn't be more different, yet whose paths were about to crash in a way no one would forget. The man who lived in the shadows of boardrooms and bank statements was known in few circles by his real name, Deshaun Carter. To most, he was just another sharply dressed executive walking from one high-rise to another, head held low, never drawing attention, never needing to. He wore quiet like a weapon, every movement precise, every word calculated. His voice rarely raised above conversation level, and yet the ones who truly understood power knew. When Deshaun entered a room, you didn't speak unless he spoke first. But he didn't need to intimidate. He didn't posture. He didn't have to. Because power like his didn't shout, it whispered. Born in the west side of Baltimore, in a neighborhood people crossed the street to avoid, Deshaun didn't grow up with power. He grew up dodging it. He watched his mother work 3 jobs to keep their tiny apartment warm, while his father, a name never spoken past age 9, disappeared into a haze of unfinished promises. What Deshaun had was observation. He learned early that talking got you in trouble, but listening could change your life. By 15, he was reading investment books no one in his school had ever heard of. By 17, he was working the back end of a car wash that fronted as a laundering operation. But unlike the others, Deshaun didn't want in on the street game. He wanted the system, not to survive under it, but to sit above it. And by 32, he had more legitimate businesses under his name than most CEOs, all backed by a silent network of loyalty and fear. But no one ever saw that side of him. To the public, he was just Deshaun, polite, discreet, unremarkable if you weren't paying attention. And that's how he liked it. The man who stood on the opposite side of everything he was had none of that subtlety. Kevin Malik was the kind of man who walked like the ground owed him stability. Loud, white, and middle-aged, with a gut just beginning to stretch the buttons of his uniform and a voice that filled every hallway, whether he was invited or not. He wasn't security, not officially. His title was Facility Supervisor at Camden Trade Tower, a corporate building known for its strict dress codes and stricter gatekeepers. But Kevin wore his badge like a sheriff's star, policing people's presence more than actual maintenance issues. In a suit and tie, he'd look like a grumpy middle manager. In a vest and boots, he looked like a man who'd been waiting for a reason to enforce the rules, his rules. Kevin grew up on the opposite side of town from Deshaun, in a neighborhood where flags flew high, fences were trimmed, and anger brewed quietly over beers and football games. His father worked as a cop, his brother in corrections, and Kevin had tried both but flunked out of the academy for inappropriate conduct. Still, he carried the weight of imagined authority. He knew his place in the city, and he knew who, in his mind, didn't belong in it, especially not in the reserved parking level of a high-profile commercial building. On the morning it all happened, nothing felt different. The air was thick with humidity. The sky held that pale gray tone before a storm, and the building hummed with the rhythm of another corporate Monday. Kevin was making his rounds, clipboard in hand, pretending to inspect something near the stairwell. Truth was, he spent most mornings leaning against that concrete wall, sipping from a travel mug and scanning the lot for violations. It wasn't about the job. It was about the little power it gave him, the ability to point, accuse, and dominate. And that's when he saw the car. A sleek black sedan pulled into Spot 4B, clearly marked reserved. The driver didn't hesitate. He parked, shut the engine, and stepped out slowly. Kevin narrowed his eyes. The man was black alone, wearing a suit that didn't match his car's plate number or, in Kevin's opinion, the environment. There was no company ID, no badge around his neck. Kevin's heart rate ticked up like it always did when he felt the urge to assert control. He took a long swig of lukewarm coffee and made his way toward him. "What's the matter, man?" Kevin began, his tone already tinged with contempt. "You can't read signs now." The man, Deshawn, paused, looking at Kevin the way someone might look at an aggressive dog on a leash. He didn't speak right away, just reached back into the car calmly, pulled out a small folder, and closed the door. "I wasn't aware this spot belonged to someone in particular," he said, voice low, without emotion. Kevin stepped closer, puffing up like a bull about to charge. "It belongs to people who work here. You got a badge? You got business in this building? 'Cause you sure as hell don't look like you belong." Deshawn didn't flinch, didn't argue, just tilted his head slightly. "I believe I'm parked within the lines." Kevin sneered. "Don't get smart with me. You people always pushing buttons." And then, in front of 3 bystanders, a delivery guy, a young woman in a pantsuit, and a man with headphones halfway on, Kevin lifted his boot and shoved Deshawn square in the chest. It wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. The kind of violation that speaks more than words ever could. Deshawn stumbled back a step, but caught himself. Didn't fall. Didn't retaliate. He simply straightened his jacket, brushed the front, and looked Kevin dead in the eyes. "You have no idea what you just did." Kevin laughed like a man who thought he'd won. Like a man who thought he couldn't lose. The crowd didn't interfere. The girl turned away. The man with the headphones filmed, but silently. And the moment passed like so many others in cities like this, without consequence, without justice. But the silence that followed wasn't surrender. Deshawn walked away. By the time he reached the elevator, his phone buzzed. A single message. "He's been identified. Proceed." He didn't reply. Not yet. Because Deshawn Carter wasn't impulsive. He didn't act out of emotion. He didn't react. He orchestrated. And this wasn't about rage. It was about principle. Because men like Kevin thrived when no one responded. When silence meant weakness. When professionalism was mistaken for fear. And for too long, Deshawn had let men like that go unchecked. But this time wasn't about pride. It was about the reminder. That power isn't what you show. It's what you hold back. And in the days that followed, the balance of the world around Kevin would begin to shift, in ways he wouldn't even notice at first. But the foundations of his so-called safety were already cracking. What he didn't know was that everything he stood on, job security, social protection, false superiority, had just been pulled out from under him. Because in a city that fed on appearance, the most dangerous man was the one who didn't look like a threat. But soon, Kevin Malik would understand exactly what he had triggered. And when that understanding came, it would be far too late to undo. It had been 17 days since the parking lot incident. 17 days since Kevin had shoved his boot into a man's chest, laughed, and walked away as if the world would keep spinning in his favor forever. But something had shifted in the silence after that moment. Not in Kevin, not at first, but in the world around him. It started subtly. His badge stopped unlocking certain restricted areas of the building. His access code failed twice before being mysteriously reset. Then came the HR email, bland, corporate cold, informing him that a complaint had been filed and was under review. Kevin laughed it off, as he always did. Rules didn't apply to him. Rules were for other people. For the soft. For the ones who couldn't stand up for themselves. Still, he started noticing faces in the office, whispering a bit longer when he passed. Conversations fell silent when he entered rooms. Even the front desk clerk, a girl who used to flirt with him just to pass time, now avoided eye contact. The real anxiety didn't begin until the morning the building's general manager was removed. Just gone. No explanation. No goodbye. Word got around that corporate had flown in a replacement, someone higher up, someone with connections. And for the first time in his 5 years at Camden Trade Tower, Kevin felt something shift beneath his boots. That afternoon, the elevators stopped working for maintenance, just the ones he used. The following day, his work truck was missing from the garage. Relocated, they said. No apology. No heads up. Just vanished. Even the vending machine near his office, which he'd practically claimed as his personal snack station, started rejecting his bills. The discomfort escalated into something more sinister when he arrived at work one morning and saw 3 unfamiliar men standing near the lobby. Dark suits, clean cut, stone faces. One of them looked directly at him, tilted his head, and then looked away. Kevin's stomach tightened. They weren't security. They weren't sales reps. They were watching. Later that day, a memo was circulated about the installation of new surveillance systems on the premises, cameras in the loading docks, tighter protocols for external vendors, badge audits. Kevin read it 3 times, each word sounding louder than the one before. When he tried to speak to his supervisor, he was told she was in a meeting. That meeting, he would later find out, lasted the entire day. By the time Friday rolled around, Kevin's nerves were wearing thin. He spent half the morning pacing the service corridor behind the conference center, muttering about liberal witch hunts and entitlement culture, gripping his phone tightly, as if it could still protect him. But no one was listening anymore. He was starting to sound like a man who could feel the walls closing in, but didn't know which way to run. Then came the moment that would rewrite everything. It was 10:43 a.m. A fire drill was scheduled for noon. The offices were buzzing with impatient energy, people already planning to slip out early and head into the weekend. Kevin stood in the maintenance office alone, scrolling angrily through an online forum, ranting in the comments under a video he hadn't watched all the way through. That's when the door opened. He turned quickly, ready to bark at whoever dared interrupt him without knocking, until he saw who stood there. Deshawn. But not in a suit this time. Not in silence. Not hiding. He stepped in like he owned the ground beneath their feet. And, in a way, he did. Kevin froze, blinking twice as if his eyes had betrayed him. What the hell are you doing here? Deshawn didn't answer right away. He looked around the office, at the cluttered desk, the toolbox on the floor, the laminated flyers on the wall. Then his gaze settled back on Kevin. You said I didn't belong here, he said, voice calm, each word cutting like glass. Kevin took a step forward, trying to regain some footing. You assaulted me, man. I got footage. I got rights. You assaulted me, Deshawn replied, still steady. You didn't know who I was. And now you do. Kevin's laugh cracked like dry wood. So what, you think just 'cause you wear a nice suit and talk all calm, you get to walk in here and act like you run the place? Deshawn leaned against the desk slightly, folding his arms. I don't need to act like I run anything. At that moment, the office phone rang. Kevin reached for it, but it stopped after half a chime. Then his cell buzzed. He checked it. 3 messages from unknown numbers. The same image attached to each one. A still frame from the surveillance video. The kick. His face. Deshawn on the ground. You planned this, Kevin said slowly, eyes wide now. Deshawn didn't blink. No. You planned it. I just let you execute. The door opened again. This time, the men in dark suits stepped in, the ones from the lobby. Behind them came a tall, elegant woman holding a briefcase and a file. She nodded at Deshawn and handed him the folder. Kevin's voice cracked. What the hell is this? Termination notice, the woman said. Effective immediately. Security footage, eyewitness statements, and digital evidence of workplace misconduct, racial aggression, and physical assault. You can't be serious, Kevin snapped. This is a setup. Call it whatever you want, Deshawn replied. But when you used your boot, you left more than a mark on my chest. You gave me everything I needed. Who are you? Kevin's voice had lowered now. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't raging. He was unraveling. Deshawn stepped closer. I'm the man you thought couldn't fight back. I'm the man you assumed had no power. You wanted me beneath you. But I've been beneath no one for a long, long time. Kevin backed into the desk, heart racing. So what? This is your revenge. Humiliate me? Get me fired. This isn't revenge, Deshawn said. This is exposure. You've spent years believing you were safe because no one stood up to you. That ends today. The agents stepped forward. One of them pulled out a badge. Mr. Malik, you're under arrest for aggravated assault, falsifying workplace documents, and obstruction of internal investigations. Kevin's voice cracked into a whisper. This is crazy. Deshawn's gaze didn't waver. No. This is what happens when people like you forget that silence doesn't mean powerlessness. That dignity isn't weakness. And that one day, someone's going to remind you. As Kevin was cuffed, dragged out past the stunned faces of coworkers, Deshawn stood still in the maintenance office, the silence around him thunderous. But the most haunting sound came from Kevin himself. Not a scream, not a curse, but a question, trembling as he looked over his shoulder one last time. Why didn't you stop me that day? Deshawn's answer came like a stone through glass. Because if I had, you wouldn't have learned anything. And then he turned. The hallway swallowed his footsteps. And behind him, the weight of every quiet injustice cracked open under the force of one final, unexpected reckoning. Months passed. The city kept moving, oblivious on the surface. But somewhere beneath all the noise and routine, something fundamental had shifted. Not in Deshawn. His world had always been built on silence, strategy, and patience. But in the balance of power around him. Camden Trade Tower, once a symbol of gatekeeping and unspoken hierarchies, now whispered a different story. The incident that had started as a moment of violence had evolved into a landmark internal investigation. Policies were rewritten, security teams restructured, and employee trainings that once felt performative were replaced by direct action and accountability. The stain Kevin Malik had left on the building's history wasn't scrubbed away. It was documented, studied, and turned into protocol. Deshawn never once stepped in front of a camera. He denied every interview request, ignored every corporate email asking for a statement of healing to appease public image, and never mentioned Kevin's name again. That wasn't his mission. He didn't need the headlines. His satisfaction didn't come from loud applause, but from quiet correction. Justice, to him, wasn't a performance. It was structure. It was restoration. And in the space where Kevin once patrolled with inflated authority, Deshawn placed a young, sharp-minded operations manager named Tarek, a former security guard turned logistics expert who knew what it meant to be underestimated. Under Tarek's direction, hiring practices evolved, community partnerships were initiated, and access wasn't policed by fear, but by fairness. Kevin, meanwhile, faced a storm he never saw coming. After his arrest, footage of his assault went viral, not just because of what he did, but because of who he did it to. Once the public connected the dots between the faceless man he humiliated and the silent force behind some of the city's most powerful ventures, the outrage exploded. Kevin became a symbol, not of strength, not of standing his ground, as he once proudly proclaimed, but of exposed ignorance. Within a week, he was jobless. Within a month, his bank accounts were frozen due to fraudulent overtime claims. And by the time his court date arrived, there was no one left in his corner. His brother, a correctional officer, refused to testify on his behalf. His lawyer pushed for a plea deal just to avoid the media nightmare. And when sentencing came, Kevin stood not as the man who once barked orders and threats, but as someone stripped of the illusion of control, sentenced to time in a facility where he was no longer feared, no longer respected. Just another face among many, who had mistaken arrogance for invincibility. Deshaun, in contrast, expanded quietly. He opened 2 new business fronts. One a scholarship fund for students from his old neighborhood. The other a real estate agency focused on reclaiming neglected properties in underserved communities and returning ownership to local residents. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He didn't care for savior narratives. But he understood that power meant little if it wasn't used to shift the ground others walked on. And for the first time in years, he walked through the city not as a ghost among skyscrapers, but as someone who had reclaimed a space stolen from him one humiliating morning, not with fists, not with threats, but with clarity, precision, and unshakable dignity. In his office, overlooking the same parking lot where it had all begun, Deshaun kept a single framed image, not of Kevin, not of the assault, but of himself, standing in the reflection of the building's glass facade the morning after. His posture straight, his face unreadable. A man who had made a choice, to let the system reveal itself, to let consequence bloom in its own time. And as Baltimore continued to shift, building by building, block by block, a quiet truth echoed through boardrooms and break rooms alike. Some power doesn't need to shout. It simply waits, watches, and when the time is right, it rewrites the rules. Now, let me ask you something. How many times have you seen injustice and stayed silent, believing it wasn't your place to respond? How many times have you watched someone be disrespected, written off, or excluded just because they didn't look or sound like they belonged? And how many times have you thought that dignity equals weakness, that silence means submission? Because maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous people aren't the ones who scream the loudest, but the ones who stay quiet until it matters most. Let this story remind you, the world doesn't always hand justice on a silver platter. Sometimes it's carved out slowly, deliberately, by people who've mastered patience. People like Deshaun. People who know that real strength doesn't come from proving yourself to others. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and never needing to prove a damn thing. If this story moved you, made you think, or made you feel seen, let us know in the comments. What part hit hardest for you? What would you have done in Deshaun's place? And if you want more powerful twists like this one, stories where justice isn't just served, it's earned, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and follow Tales of Twist. There's always another story waiting, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next one.